was, I'd been in the job, when the transfer decision came about, the officer commanding 162 Reconnaissance Squadron, the Army Light Observation Helicopter Squadron at Laverack Barracks, the CO of that was a Major Bill Mellor, went on to become a brigadier. And he and I was the squadron leader at 35, and we were joking about whether it would be Major Thynne or Squadron Leader Mellor if whatever the decision came down about how we would do the things. When the final decision was made and it came down Army, I always maintained it was pretty much the right decision, but the timing wasn't right in that sense. Again, it was one of those things that you can get very, very bitter about, and a lot of guys do and still are very bitter about it, and I can understand that. I chose to say that the big thing is to have the capability working effectively for Australia, and that. But I was actually bitter, and I had formulated a concept that if the decision came down to Army, that what we do at 35 Squadron is I would get, I think at the time we had 8 aircraft when the decision was made, and I would get 7 other guys. We'd put a sandbag in the left seat, and the 7 of us would fly the 8 helicopters over to Laverack and park them on the Laverack airstrip and leave them there. But the decision was made, we were going down for the gunship handover to 35 Squadron. We were about to take over the gunships. So it was the end of gunships at 9 Squadron. So we were caribooed down for the big ceremony and everything else, and we'd taken them on board, and we were in Amberley when the decision came out. We were on the way back up in the Caribou. I spoke to my 7 cohorts and said, well, when we get back, we'll get in at the right time, we'll start them up, we'll leave them there for the night, take them over and leave them there for the night. As was getting out, the CO said, please don't, John. He'd obviously heard that I intended to do this, and so we didn't do it. It wouldn't have made any difference, it just would have screwed my career, I guess. But, angry, yeah. But
were you made offers to go across?
Those are another interesting thing. What happened was that they found it very difficult to keep people in the Air Force liaison officer's job with the 3rd Brigade. The BALO was the terminology. And they'd gone through 3 guys really, really quickly that had quit rather than do that job. So whilst I'd been promised that I'd stay flying at 35 until the handover into B Squadron 5 Aviation Regiment, and something would happen for me after that was going to be nice for me, that's fine. What actually happened was they needed someone in the BALO's job, and I'd said that I wanted to stay in Townsville for family reasons, so they rang me up and said, would you take the BALO's job? And I went, okay. So I took it, ended up doing 4 years as the sole Air Force officer in the 3rd Brigade. But when I was in the job, 2 of the brigadiers, the first one that I worked for, Peter Arneson, ex-Governor of Queensland, and the second one, Jim Connolly, both said to me that I should apply to transfer to Army. In I think probably 89, I'm going to say, I actually applied to transfer and went through the process of having a selection board interview in Canberra. And I went back and we went up into a major exercise up in the Northern Territory, and we were in the field, and I got a phone call from a guy who had worked with me in the Army personnel area, and he said, look, we're about to make you an offer, and you may not be that happy with it, and at that stage I was a Squadron Leader Seniority 1986, and they were making me an offer to be a Captain Seniority 85 instead of a Major Seniority 86, because I'd said I wanted to be in the permanent thing. And CDF, who'd made the decision, Gratian, who'd made the decision about the transfer, came to visit us in the field, and the Brigadier wheeled him into the Tactical Air Command post that I ran. And he mentioned that I had applied for transfer, which the CDF said, "Oh, that's good. How's it going?" And I thought, "Are you a sheep or a lamb?" And I said, "Well, not real well, sir. They're about to offer me Captain 85 when I'm a Squadron Leader 86, and that's in direct contravention of everything you said about no one's careers being affected." And he went, called his aide over and said, "Take this man's name," and whatever. They'd all disappeared. I didn't think much more of it, but about 3 days later I got an offer of Major Seniority 86. But I worked out that if that was what they thought of me and how they were going to treat me, I didn't need that. So I passed and stayed in the Air Force. Was selected.
Yeah, a bit of a different culture though, isn't it?
Look, I spent so long working with Army, in the Army even, in the thing, that I understood, I think I still do, understand them pretty well. And there are 3 services, and they're each for very good reason, to be honest. Yeah, it's a different culture. And I watched them do things with the helicopters that we would never do. And it sent shivers down my back. But in terms of them achieving Army aims, they would probably say they ticked all the boxes. So, you know, you look at that and you think it through. They had issues, they had events. The SAS accident up in Townsville, in high range. By then I'd become a aircraft accident investigator, and there were elements of that wouldn't have happened if I had been in a position to influence how work was done. The way that they flew it and what they did, the formations they flew and the procedures were ones that they developed themselves, whereas if they had taken the old 9 Squadron ones and applied them, they would have possibly had a different outcome, a better outcome. But you can go back and visit how many accident chains you like. Some you can break the chain and others you can't, or you don't. You know, you can get into that whole thing. They made a very bad decision about replacing the Black Hawks with the NH90. That's a personal view, but they were heading down a path that they thought was the right way to do it. The armed helicopters. I mean, you know, every ex-helicopter pilot that I know in the Air Force has said all the way, buy Black Hawks, buy Apaches. Black Hawks and buy Apaches. We didn't. There were reasons for it, political, Army political, Australian political, whatever you like. Those decisions are made, you've got to live with it and you go on and do it. And that's how I feel about most of it. You know, there is certainly nothing wrong with the guys. I mean, the Army flew the Iroquois for longer than we did, which a lot of people think about.
Right.
You know, they did 30 years of Iroquois operations, and we did 24. So, you know, you can swings and roundabouts.
That'll be a similar story with the Chinook.
The Chinook, when you know, you've been through that. You know, when I got grounded medically in 73, I was either going to go to Chinooks or an instructor's course. You know, that was the path. I might well have worked for your dad in 12 Squadron. Wasn't to be. Do I go back and revisit it? I mean, you know, I've got Dave Falls and Hendo, I've got Jock O'Keefe, lots of really good mates, the 12 Squadron guys. And in all of the military, you make these friends, you go off and do things, and then you can get back together, and that's what we do. We sit down and have a meal and a beer and a chat. Do that often.